Good morning, and welcome to our continuing series of sermons looking at the early church as it's portrayed in the book of Acts and how that can help us to understand being a Christian community in the 21st century. If you're reading the book Unleashed, then we have reached section 2, and we'll be drawing on themes from the first 2 chapters of this section. And those chapters are called Living Independently and Living as One. We had 2 readings this morning. The reading from Acts accompanies this section of the book. The reading from Matthew's Gospel is today's lectionary reading, and as I was looking through it in the week, it gave me an insight into why we need to be part of a community of faith. So before we head on over to Acts and look at the early church and that community of faith and how that can help us, let's just remind ourselves of what was going on in the Gospel this morning. Jesus is sending out his disciples on a mission. He's sending the 12 on a mission. He has empowered them, given them authority to perform all sorts of miracles. And he also gives them a message. It's short, but urgent. The kingdom of heaven is near. Jesus tells his disciples only to go to Jews, not to visit Gentile places. He's not leaving the Gentiles out of hearing the message. What he's doing is giving the disciples a mission that they can accomplish. It's the early days of their apprenticeship, and they're probably not up to explaining the scriptures to people who are unfamiliar with them. So Jesus has given them a short, urgent message and sent them to people who already have the knowledge and the understanding, and if their minds and hearts are open, they will accept the message that the disciples bring. So for the sake of those people and for the disciples, Jesus has given the disciples a mission they can accomplish. And that's the point I'd like us to bear in mind as we look at Acts and the early church. God never gives us a task we can't achieve. So let's head on over to Jerusalem and that beautiful idyllic passage describing the early church in perfect harmony. We all know that as we read on through the New Testament, there's plenty of evidence that the early church wasn't always that well behaved. But this is the ideal, it's the blueprint, and it was achieved and sustained, so it's not impossible. And the basic premise is quite easy to understand. Where there's a need, provide for that need. But can we translate this to 21st century Holy Trinity? Well, yes and no. Yes, the basic premise is translatable. It might not always be easy to carry out, but we can understand it. The issue is around what are the needs? In 1st century Jerusalem, the needs were the necessities of life. They were food and shelter. And the church, and let's be clear when we read this isn't early Christians trying to feed and house the whole of Jerusalem. It's the early Christian church feeding and housing the poorer members of its own community. So the early Christian church is providing what's needed. But what's needed in our community? What do we, as a family at Holy Trinity, need? After all, none of us are going to go to bed tonight hungry. We all have a roof over our head. Those aren't our needs. Do we have needs? We all have homes and televisions and holidays and cars and things. Oh yes, of course, we do have needs. And actually, it's this Western privileged lifestyle which piles on the pressure as well as providing all these luxuries. The pressure to succeed. We are all supposed to be independent and self-sufficient and standing on our own 2 feet. And that is a really difficult world to live in. We all know that well-being, quite a buzzword at the moment, is negatively affected by the pressures of modern life. The expectations But as Christians, we're aware that there is no success without God, and there is no independence from God. So, as individuals forming a community, we're well placed to support each other as the pressures of life get too much. I think we're all beginning to suffer from the fact that we can't visit family members or just go to places that help us unwind. And of course, more recently than the lockdown, we've had to face up to the fact that the privileged lifestyle we enjoy is based on several centuries of historical abuse and mistreatment and slavery. We're reaping the benefits of that history, and we need to face that. And again, as a Christian community, we're well placed to help each other work through what that means and what we're supposed to do about it. I think Holy Trinity is actually very good at being supportive. We listen, people are compassionate, they're thoughtful, they're gentle and kind. We notice when other people need something, and they get what they need. It's often an ear and a cup of tea, maybe. We're also good at noticing and saying thank you. Thank you, that was helpful. Or thank you, I think that was really useful for so-and-so. We encourage each other by not only noticing, but telling people we've noticed when they do something that is loving, Christian, kind. If you look at Galatians chapter 5, Paul lists what he calls the fruits of the Spirit. These traits are all in there, and I think we have them in abundance at Holy Trinity. We are good at encouraging. We are good at telling people when they've done something kind. And this actually addresses our needs. We all feel better if we're told that we've done something good. We feel better if we're appreciated for having made an effort. It's not rocket science, but it sometimes gets overlooked in this modern world. And it's where we're really good. We're really effective. We're a community of encouragers. And I think that actually is what the early church was doing. By sharing, by levelling the playing field, they were encouraging everybody to be a full part of the church. And that's where I want to bring the gospel back in again. That idea that God never gives us a task that we're not capable of accomplishing. Because we're part of a community that encourages, that prays, that lifts each other up, that holds each other, we know our strengths individually and as a community. So when God taps us on the shoulder, as Glyn said a couple of weeks ago, either individually or as a church, we know that we can accomplish whatever it is God is asking of us, because we have a community of support and encouragement, and God never asks us to do something that we can't accomplish. Amen.